And we are live. Welcome, everybody. This is the second webinar in the webinar series on international higher education and international students. There is Dr. Krishna Bista, who is the editor of the Journal of International Students, which is sponsoring this discussion series. And I'm extremely proud and honored to introduce a few really wonderful scholars in this field. My name is Samsara. I would like to request everybody to introduce themselves, and then Dr. Bista has 3 questions for informally structuring our conversation today. There are a few other colleagues that are still trying to get in. We will be asking them to introduce themselves a little later. In a moment, I would like to go mute myself and try to help them to come in. But let's start with introduction with those of us who are already in.
Sure, I'll go first. My name is David Komp. I'm Associate Director at of International Programs at the University of Chicago Booth School of Business. I'm also a study abroad research consultant for the Center for Global Education. It's currently housed at California State University, Dominguez Hills. It's a virtual resource center, primarily grant funded, and so its previous home was at UCLA. It's run by Dr. Gary Rhodes, who's now at Cal State Dominguez Hills, and I also do a lot of other side consulting projects. And I guess that's it about me for right now.
Okay, I'll go next. Hi, I'm Diana Carlin. I recently retired from St. Louis University as the Associate Provost for Graduate and Global Education. Prior to that, I was the International Dean and Graduate Dean at the University of Kansas. I am a member of the NAFSA Board of Directors, and I'm actually speaking from Springfield, Missouri, where we just completed the Region 4 NAFSA conference. So I've been here for the last 3 days. That with you.
I will jump in. Hello, everyone. This is Krishna Bista from University of Louisiana, Monroe. I'm a faculty in a graduate program in educational leadership, curriculum, and instruction. And we started the Journal of International Student about 10 years ago, and I'm so pleased to have my editors and colleagues together for this webinar. I usually write and publish about international students in higher education and educational technologies in college teaching. These are my 3 area of studies, research that I've been doing for the last 7-8 years. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Samsara. I'm an assistant professor in the program in writing and rhetoric here at Stony Brook University in the State University of New York system. This is my 5th year here. My interest, among other things, is researching writing support and academic services for international graduate students, a population that has not been too much of a focus of conversation in the US. So I'm doing a large-scale study and trying to report on the current status of the support system, support services.
Hello? Can you hear me?
Hello, Jean. Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Well,
Hi, this is Jin. I completed my dissertation on international education last year, and I'm a researcher and production editor of research in the schools, which is academic journal. I work for Sam Houston State University in Texas. My research area is global comparative studies in international education. I published several articles and book chapters in this area. Obviously, some with Dr. Bista.
Okay, without further ado, we'd like to go into our main theme of the conference today, seminar, webinar. Today we are focusing on student mobility in higher education. So we have 3 questions. The first one, I'd like to start with a bigger, broader questions about global competition. So the question is, I know it's 2-3 parts. The first part is there a global competition for international student? If there is, how are U.S. institutions of higher education attracting the students they want? And the second part is, how could they better through improving academic support as well as other strategies? Now the question is open to the floor, and I like my guest to share the ideas, experience.
Sure, this is David. I'll go first. Yeah, there absolutely is a global competition, and I would say it's pretty fierce amongst a variety of players. Most recently, even just this last month, Australia issued their first national strategy on international education for 2025. And so that is just one of the countries that you're seeing that has national strategy that looking at not only some abroad, but can they bring in international students. They have a plan of developing Australia into a global leader in education, research, and training. They're allocating 12 million Australian dollars towards this initiative. And just looking at my notes here that I wrote down, it's that they're putting that 12 million Australian dollars towards this effort to support the sector's value as Australia's third largest export. So, you know, when you really get down to it, we're looking at GATS, you know, the General Agreement on Trades and Services, and countries are really vying for students. Right or wrong, good or bad, however you feel about it, international students has become an economic issue. So it's not just at the national level. You see these at the state level with like Study Illinois or Study Mississippi. Michigan has the GTRI, which is the Global Talent Retention Initiative of Michigan. And one of their 11 recommendations that came out of that is to retain the international students that are studying at Michigan schools, colleges, and universities. And so, and you are also seeing a lot of cities that have recognized the economic impact of international students. You know, going back to City of Aberdeen, these are just a select few that I've pulled out, but the City of Aberdeen in 2008 and again in 2015, their city council has conducted a report on the value that international students bring to the city. Dublin in 2009, Brisbane in 2004, in 2007, and Auckland City in 2003. So it's getting at the city level. And then, of course, you have the institutional level around the country. It's schools here in the U.S. are competing for students, as well as competing against our global peers. We have here in the U.S. Education USA, which is a Department of State funded initiative, which has 400 centers in 170 countries. So we are really trying to be competitive in that space. There's a lot of social media activities that Education USA has really been involved with. I don't know the metrics or the data on the ROI with those tools that they're using to engage and help recruit international students to the U.S., but it's certainly been an active component for nearly a decade with Education USA. You know, you just walk through the NAFSA exhibit hall, and it is clear at the national, regional, you know, you have Study Manitoba, or this, again, going back to the Study Illinois, to the institutional level, all competing for students. And so, I think for me, it's.
I think I'm in.
The biggest thing is certainly dollar signs are a big motivating factor for schools and for these nation states to set up these policies. But is that the most appropriate approach? You know, for me, I think it's better to approach your recruitment of international students to find the best and brightest to have a good fit for your campus, to help internationalize your campus. And the side benefit of that is the economic piece of it. But more and more, you're seeing the dollar signs come into play with the recruitment of international students. So I'll kind of leave it at that for right now.
Thank you.
So let us ask Bernhard to introduce himself, because we did that a moment ago, so that we can continue the conversation where we left. Maybe we can also repeat the question. Bernhard? And then Anita. Oh, you are muted, by the way. Please unmute. Yeah.
Is it now unmuted? Is it working?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Hello, everyone. And thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this conversation. My name is Bernhard Streitwieser, and I'm an assistant professor of international education at the George Washington University here in Washington, D.C. I very much look forward to being part of this conversation, and I'm delighted, Dr. Bista, that you've invited me to be part of this. Thank you so much. And Shyam, thank you for your help.
Thank you. Anita.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dr. Anita Gopal, and I'm a postdoctoral research associate at the University of Maryland. And I research international students in STEM fields, specifically the socialization and retention, their academic experiences. And I am very happy to join my colleagues today, and thank you, Shyam, for your technical assistance in helping me join the group.
Not a problem.
Thank you. We are still continuing our first part of the conversation related to global competition for international students. So the question I was asking, if there is a global competition for international students, how are U.S. institutions of higher education attracting the students they want? And how could they better through improving academic support as well as other strategies? Let's continue the conversation.
Okay, I think I'm unmuted. Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, this is Diana. I'll jump in here. In terms, I agree with David. It's a pretty fierce competition globally. The U.S. It's still the #1 destination for students who are studying outside their home country. We have about 19% of the total share. That was based on 2014 data, and we should be getting some of the newer data now. The new open doors will come out in a couple weeks, but for the 2015 report, we were up 10% in the number of students, percentage of students who came to the U.S. But one of the interesting things with that data is that, as always, the increases were higher at the graduate level than they were at the undergraduate level, and we still tend to attract more graduate students. But the biggest jump in the increased numbers was in non-degree seeking students. That was up 17.8% compared to 8% for graduate and 7% for undergraduate. And I think that says a lot about how many American universities are approaching the global competition. And David's point about what's going on in Australia, I think, is well taken. A lot of students still want to study at an English-speaking university, and so the UK, Australia, New Zealand, after 9/11, when we had some visa issues, jumped in, and what started in those countries were these non-degree seeking pathway programs for students who first wanted to study English. So you've seen Into, Shorelight, there are 4 or 5 of these other for-profit companies that do the recruiting for the universities, bring students in who need ESL first, and then they provide a pathway for them into a degree program, either at that university or another. And so this non-degree increase of over 17%, I think, says a lot about how the U.S. has changed their tactics to try to get students in. I think one other thing that's happening globally is the emphasis on ratings, on rankings. And so everyone wants to be a top 100 university. We still have the majority of those in the U.S., the highest number. So that still makes us attractive. But it's a double-edged sword, I think, for American universities in terms of recruitment, because a lot of students, they want to go to the top universities in the U.S. And many of them are not going to get into those universities, but they don't necessarily know about a lot of us. I'm in a flyover state, St. Louis, Missouri. We have, Washington University is a top 100, top national university. So they're going to attract a lot of those top international students. But we have a lot of other universities in the Midwest that people don't know about. Some of them are state, some of them are private. And so when students are only using all of those rankings, it often they overlook really good places for them that might be a very good fit and places where they can actually compete. And then what's happened is because of many other countries wanting to be on those lists, you're seeing them kind of edged out. Europe has the highest mobility, with 57% of the total percentage of students who study abroad are European, but they're pretty much staying within Europe because of Bologna, Erasmus, all of the programs where that money is staying in Europe. So the competition is keen, and there are a lot of things going on. And David mentioned cost. Like I said, I just finished the NAFSA Region 4 and went to one of the sessions on recruitment. And they were pointing out that the stronger the dollar is, the more expensive it is for students to study here. And that's not considering the fact that our costs keep going up annually. So we're beginning to price ourselves out of some markets.
Thank you.
Can I add a comment to Diana's?
Yeah.
Sure.
I would just say that we heard from one of the main people at the Princeton Review in a seminar we had at GW a year and a half ago, and he said he is behind putting together that very large, thick booklet that lists, all the universities in the country, and there are over 4,000 higher education institutions. And he said something like, 80% apply to about 25 schools. Literally, everyone is applying to the same most highly ranked institutions, and they're really ignoring, as Diana said, these flyover universities that are excellent places to study. I was at Northwestern for many years, and even Northwestern doesn't get noticed as much as some of the East Coast schools. And it's really just people not realizing that there's the right school for them out there if they would only look beyond the rankings. So I think rankings in a lot of ways have done a real disservice to 95% of the other very good institutions out there that don't get paid enough attention to, because people over focus on the rankings. And in terms of Europe, that's countries are falling into step with that whole mentality, not around the world, not just in Europe. In Germany, which is a setting that I know quite well, the Excellence Initiative has really been an attempt to raise, in some ways, to raise Germany's universities in the rankings by offering large amounts of competitive funding to institutions to establish, graduate level programs, research centers, connections with research institutes that in the end really are about increasing the productivity of people at those institutions, which of course is the main thing that gets counted in rankings. So there are plenty of examples from around the world where institutions are changing the way they operate and the decision making they engage in because they're responding first and foremost to rankings. And that's not always the best strategy, but I don't know. I think it's pretty much unavoidable. It's just a matter of will rankings become more nuanced and better able to determine truth strength of institutions from one another, and then will people be able to become savvy consumers of that information so that they can make a decision based on what's right for them, not just what's right in terms of the best reputation.
I'm wondering if there is a self-correcting mechanism in the sense that if the high-ranking institutions are also starting to charge way too much, that students will be looking at other universities, at least on a personal level, anecdotal level, that I know that students coming from my home country or that part of the world are really looking to universities that provide really good support for international students. I don't know if there's a mechanism for international students to know what universities will provide them support once they get here, because instead of becoming an unsuccessful student left to their own means at a high-ranking university, I think students should be going to universities that provide them support. And this is the issue that I want to also connect and maybe raise the second question before we go there. But basically, if we don't focus on the quality and support and the strength, how students adapt to and succeed part of it, then people will be asking the wrong question, and we might actually not be able to compete on a global scale forever. We may be just experiencing a 30-year rise and 40-year rise until the world becomes more sort of accessible. I mean, the information about university in different countries become more accessible. There are 5 or 7 or 10 countries on the list now that were not even mentioned in terms of international student destination in the past, right? And who knows that if the money quote unquote money grabbing mentality begins to dominate and reaches a peak, we may be the ranking and that kind of the prestige itself may not actually help the large big picture of U.S. international education.
I'm just gonna, I think you make a very important point, and I think that, there's a dichotomy that universities are, they grapple with, and the economics factor of recruiting students is very real. At the same time, I wholeheartedly agree with the support of international students. If you keep recruiting students and there's no mechanisms in place to to support them, that's really going to impact their experience. And will it not impact the ranking of the institution if the result is the students are going to a particular university and they're not having a positive experience because of the lack of support? I know because I was having technical difficulties that I wasn't able to really weigh in on the first question, but I think what also plays into student experiences is, their immigration. It's the process in which that they go through in order to come to the university. And I think the support structures don't only start when students arrive, it starts from the moment that they are admitted. So I would make a call for some sort of structures to be in place once they are admitted to help them through that transition, before they arrive at their host country and during the time that they're there, and have some sort of centralized service, where students can go to, because I know many students that I've heard from are, they're overwhelmed with being new and just arriving and having to go to maybe 10 different offices to seek support, when there could be one place, where they could seek some sort of, support, answer to their questions, just, more of a streamlined process to aid, since they're grappling with enough when they arrive, just trying to find housing or just trying to get familiar with their surroundings. I think that it's important to look at the student in a holistic framework, in a holistic way, and start with, support that way, because students they're more than just economic factors to, enrich a country's economy.
I'll be very quick. I can't help share this experience. I was at graduate student organization invited me at my university yesterday to ask me about the research that I'm doing. I finished the data collection from 20 universities, and as Anita was saying, in very small universities whose names few international students know, international student support was very robust and very high quality. But at the Ivy League institutions that I went, not many of, or the top-notch university that I went to, not many universities had, not only because they were big, but also because they seem to assume that their international students are the cream of the crop that are already capable of handling the academic transition. They assume that they already know how to write and research and present. They assume they already are good in their subject matter. But, and so there's this paradox that the more you assume that the students are capable, the more blind spots you create. And it didn't go with quality and ranking. It went with the thoughtfulness of the people. Sometimes it's only a few people that are creating a back channel network of providing students the information as to where the support is. Sometimes there's a centralized mechanism where students can go no matter what. Sometimes there's one individual that they have access to who is able to advise these students. But the questions are not predictable for international students. It's not like, there are set questions. It's someone whose life is like completely upended when they come from the other side of the world, and the cultural, social, and they're also sort of intersectional, meaning one problem seems to show us as another. Well, sometimes one problem seems to just completely derail the students' academic transition and growth. And I think you're really getting to the heart with a practical idea that if we really want to increase the number of international students, we may want to put the financial question in the back burner, start providing support so that we can show off students that have been successful, that we make successful, not students that were already successful coming in. what kind of model of education is that tries to take the already perfect, and what do you do after that, right? I mean, we need to really be able to take responsibility that all students are learners, all students from one place and get to another, that all students need support based on their unique needs and challenges. And international students have a lot of unique needs and challenges. So the student group that I went to yesterday resisted for like half an hour that international students have any unique needs. They kept saying, all students have the same need. All students graduate students have the similar needs. So what are you talking about? And I'm like, I told you that I'm writing a book almost done. And I told you that I went across the country to basically asking this question. Can you stop resisting and listen to me for a moment, right? But you come back to this question of quality in a very bad sense. I remember a top-level university official asking me, you are doing this, this expert on international students, answer this question. Like, what's the question? How do we get the best of the best, the cream of the crop around the world? And my answer was, well, I have an answer to that. Let us spend 3 to 5 years to create the best students possible and show them off. And then we can invite better students and then show them off after we produce better students. The method should be, let's produce the best students we can, and let's use those students to promote as right at the university and the students' education. It's not either or. But this dichotomy that Anita was suggesting, I think another colleague also mentioned, is that the thinking that quality has to do with name recognition, quality has to do with ranking. Quality should be all integral. So it should be multidimensional. It should be quality of name, quality of education, quality of service, quality of research, quality of, right? I don't know if I'm adding anything here, but I really wanted to chime in and say that's so true.
Let this Diana again jump in on a couple things you said. I think the really savvy universities are using their current international students to help them recruit. They have set up Facebook pages by country. They have chat rooms where they can talk to a student in their country. They can identify the kind of support that these students are looking for. But I think in addition to the typical services we offer international students, I think we also have to think about faculty. And that was one big issue that we discussed at the SNAFSA meeting, is how do you get to the faculty to begin to develop some cultural awareness among the faculty? Because what these students were suggesting to you is pretty much what they're probably also hearing from their faculty, that all graduate students are alike, you're all dealing with the same issues. Yeah. And so I think we have to think bigger about where we're impacting students. And that's a more difficult piece than changing your international services office or you're advising pre-admission. And that's where the students are going to succeed or fail. The really good universities also have a lot of data on their websites about time to degree, retention rates, placement. And once again, those tend to be the universities that are the top ones. So it's sort of like the rich get richer. But if it's not that difficult to do that, so I think that's another piece that international offices can do to help the academic units understand what they have to put out there.
Can I add a comment to that?
Yes.
I think it's been pointed out for years that this is, in a number of books and articles that have been published in the last 15 or so years, that, Lisa Childress's book comes to mind, all about faculty being the key sort of in this whole question of how to get international students the kind of recognition and respect and support that they need. It really does, the faculty in some sense are the linchpin who have to buy in and support the whole idea of us valuing our international students and incorporating them into the university structure as much as possible, starting with even just the classroom, being sensitive to what they bring to the classroom and different ways of learning. They have to learn how to be able to participate, or if they don't participate as much, it's possibly for cultural reasons that don't mean the student's not interested or not engaged. And to educate, the faculty member has to educate the domestic students about how the role and the difficulty and the challenges international students bring with them when they come to the home institution, that is our institution where we're comfortable, and it's in the world we know, but for them it's really foreign. And it's really the faculty who has to lead by example and through what they say that I think will make it possible for the international student then to begin having a feeling that they're included, that they're wanted, and really have a stake in that place. I'm getting some echo, so I'm going to stop talking. But I do think the faculty are really almost the most important to be the role models and the leaders in helping international students succeed at universities.
All right, just I will add a comment. According to my study findings, I created a university research-based university model. So my big kind of overarching theme is to kind of go global. When you recruit students, just you kind of establish a clear goal. So what is the really goals? And in your goal, in your agenda, what is really your goal means? Like, if, for example, what is the international students' success? If you really promote their academic success of international students, what it really means kind of promoting internationalizations in your institutions. Like promoting institution means like it kind of increasing number of international students on your campus. It's more, their presence is much more visible, or really truly kind of diversifying international people, and then adapt to their culture, and then they educate the people and they promote the institution, they promote to their academic success, academic and personal development, and keep growth. So I think I have to really, in the communication, really establish the clear goals of what it really means in the institution. I think that is very important. And then in recruiting students, like go global, but once they bring in, how they really kind of focus on kind of local, how they embrace their individual students to their institution, they educate them. I think that is the second thing, just that everybody just mentioned that how just we recruit students and then satisfy their corresponding needs brought by international students. And then I create back to my study, I create a research-based university model that is in the model, as mentioned here by one of the speakers, the critical role of faculty members, because the class setting is that immediate cross-cultural context for international students. Really, their experience is really primarily based on the interactions with the faculty members and the students in the class. So the class, how they really how they adjust to the class setting, if they are really from foreign, that is very, very important. So then I think the campus readiness is very important, just how much just the faculty members in the institutions, so they are really ready to teach international students, especially if they are far from kind of Western culture, whatever, different, if they bring different academic norms and values, and they are really how they can encourage them to participate in the class. They have really culturally sensitive, they are ready for that. All their teaching methods or their content, the curriculum, they're well designed to teach, those students. I think that is very important. I think somebody mentioned that, highlighted, and I totally agree with that.
Okay, I'd like to add the second question that we are focusing on the parts and there and here for our audience. And for us, I'd like to read the question. Second question is, how could educational institutions in the US balance the financial and educational objective of internationalization? How could they benefit from international student, foreign-born faculty and staff, and study abroad returnees as resources for improving internationalization of education for both domestic and international students? So in our conversation, we touched the foreign-born faculty member and the staff members. Maybe we need to have some more discussion on the study abroad returnees. is a source of improving our internationalization of education for domestic and international students?
I'm going to chime in. I think that's a tough question because, again, you know, universities are caught in a dichotomy because there is a reduced external funding support for universities. You know, for example, there's quite a few states that are cutting back on funding to universities and changing policies. And so institutions often have to look at other means of generating income. And so that's, you know, that's when the international students, that the internationalization ideas of recruitment come in. I know part of the problem solving for institutions are to create global degree programs or expand their degree offerings. I think retention is a really key aspect for scholars, foreign-born faculty and staff, because I think that if you can retain this population, that might contribute to the cultural competency of, you know, cultural competency of diverse students interacting with diverse students. And again, you know, somebody was mentioning something about having an infrastructure in place. And so I feel that that's important not only for staff, but for students. And, you know, having foreign-born faculty and scholars really, you know, contribute to an aspect of internationalization, but we need to talk about that cultural aspect and that diversity aspect. I don't want to backtrack here, but we talked about having, you know, a lot of responsibility on faculty to, you know, internationalize curriculum and teaching, but, you know, I want to point out that they can make all the strides that they want, but you know, the fact remains that there's multiple students in the classroom, not just international, they're domestic, and many of the students, you know, they want to discuss, you know, what about undocumented students? What about historically disenfranchised students? You know, what about this topic? So if you come in, you internationalize the classroom, even if you bring in that study abroad aspect, you're always going to have someone who's, you know, feeling left out of the conversation. And so I just wanted to point that out in terms of, you know, who are we leaving out of the conversation in terms of internationalization, not just international students. And, you know, again, the level of resources we also have to consider, like even those returning from study abroad, even the level of resources people have when they come back really depends upon how long they've studied abroad and how they interpret that experience and how they channel that experience at the institution. So I think there are also those important aspects to think about as well.
Can I ask a question that I have been finding quite, I brought up that question in a certain way in my comment earlier, but I am struggling with this question. I mean, I try to go to people that are supporting international students across the country, talk to the international students, talk to people that are sort of leading scholars on international students issues. But very quickly, in this broader context of internationalization, a lot of people just, those are two different questions, I think. One, I think I use this analogy of buildings and ramps. For those of us who are focusing on international students as a group of students that are new to the culture and society, that are new to the education system and practices, for those of us who are in, you know, just researching, advocating, supporting, teaching, I think it is also important to not just confuse and conflate the two questions. One is internationalization, which is all students. I actually advocate the idea that our domestic students should also be seen as international students, that they should also be taught and prepared to be global citizens, that they should also learn from international as well as vice versa. But I sometimes worry because to the many conferences and discussions that I go to in my field of writing studies, the idea that the graduate domestic students and international students face the same challenges has made people to really gloss over and rush into this intersection without really asking these questions of what are the 17 unique challenges international students face the first semester? What are the challenges that they continue to face even after the first semester? What are the challenges that they face when they go out in the job market? Because we know that some challenges are entirely unique and never the same. The visa status, the cultural acclimatization and transition, the challenges of having a family on the other side of the world, homesickness. So I really don't know, and this is a candid question, but I think it's a difficult question, because when I say, like Anita was brought up this issue, actually Krishna brought up this issue in the very question, what can we do for all students, right? But when we're talking about the ramp behind the building, sometimes we may just look at everybody using the ramp instead of the people that the ramp were built for, right? So what are the unique aspects of international student support that we need to not really drop the ball when we start talking about the general and the shared and the intersecting challenges? Should we? I mean, I feel very strongly that some of us should continue to, in terms of research, continue to ask the question. In terms of service, continue to provide those additional 3 workshops at the beginning and middle of the end of the semester. Those of us who are doing the research and, and teaching. I don't know. I feel like in my field, at least, people are rushing too quickly into the common area, forgetting the unique challenges of this field. But there's so few people that talk about international students as international students.
I'm going to chime in and agree with you on this. And I just want to point out that, international students are not just this lump sum group. They're not just this, homogenous group.
No.
They're undergraduate students, they're master's students, and they're doctoral students. They're human beings, and at each level, they face their own unique challenges, undergrad, master's, doctoral. And I think, some of the challenges, particularly that I'm hearing in my research that actually breaks my heart, is, students not being able to, who are on certain visas, and they're on certain visas because they're from certain countries, and they are not allowed, if they study in the States, they cannot go back and see their families for 5-6 years. And that causes, a lot of problems for them, or they don't have their families are not able to come to the US and visit them. And so what I asked, what can student affairs do? What kind of programs can be, developed in order to support the families of international students, in addition to their academics and so forth? And so
I guess what your question brings back is that because international students are an intersection of so many different sub-demographics, because they have not only academic but also other challenges that intersect with academic challenges. I think what we need to do is, first of all, say, while international students share this set of graduate level international students share this set of challenges with undergraduate, where international students share these set of challenges with domestic non-native English speakers, while they share these set of challenges with domestic students in general, while some of them are women who face unique challenges, and therefore those challenges can be addressed in groups that involve not only international but also other minority groups and other women. So, but these intersecting circles that overlap in many, many, many places, we can always see that something about international, which is having come from another culture, country, and academic system. That much is a common denominator. And if we can identify with that common denominator the set of challenges for students, that's why I like to use the word foreign students. The reason I use the word foreign students is because like NAFSA, it identifies a group of people for having come to this country, this culture, this academic system, right? In spite of the many, many shared challenges with domestic and other international, in spite of the many, many complexities and diversity and intersectionality within their own group, in spite of a wide range of different challenges and strengths, it still allows us to keep talking about a group of students as in terms of a set of commonalities within themselves. Does that make sense? And when we introduce the second question that Krishna introduced, I think we should not run the risk of dropping the ball on foreign students, and because we want to also look at foreign students from the perspective of internationalization, we want to look at foreign students from the perspective of quality education through global engagement for all students.
Yeah, one of the recurrent themes at the NAFSA regional conference the last 3 days has been this intersection of culture, diversity, international. And the way a lot of universities are starting to look at this is that some of our domestic students are first generation from immigrant families. They are living in areas of the country where they haven't really interacted with people outside of their own ethnic group. Mm-hmm. And we also have students from rural areas who come into a major city, and there's a culture shock there. Mm-hmm. So the kind of overarching piece is maybe diversity. And if you look at demographics in the US, we're becoming more and more diverse. And so everyone was beginning to say, we really need to begin working with the multicultural offices, with the diversity offices. And that's where I think you begin to say, how do you get the international faculty? How do you get returning American students from study abroad? And you open up this conversation to be much larger about diversity and culture, as opposed to just being an international student. Because some of the issues that our domestic students are facing, depending on what their background is, mm-hmm. are very similar to what international students are facing. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think if we begin looking at it that way, then and Anita's point's right, we only have so many resources. And you can only put faculty through so many workshops. So if you can find those commonalities and places where you can intersect, then I think we begin to take advantage of all those pieces Krishna set out.
Mm-hmm. Okay, considering the time factors, I'd like to move on the next questions. I know we have overlapped with some of our information experience. The third final question is, China, India, and South Korea are top 3 countries for sending international students to US. What are the current perception and discourses about receiving large number of international students from a small number of countries? Are there any shifting paradigms, and how do you perceive personally? How do you take this personally with the large number of international students receiving from certain countries?
I can share just a sentence. Well, the recruitment office director at my university, I was going to China and I said, I'd like to carry some swag and promote our university in China. And she basically said, oh, we don't need more students from China. I think whenever you go to Nepal or other countries, Nepal and other countries later on, let me know, but I don't think we should be promoting more in China. I think university is already sensitive to the lopsided sources of students. I don't know what other colleagues think.
Yeah, this is David. I think the perceptions vary. It depends on the institution. I would say my institution is fairly diverse in terms of international students. We do see larger numbers from certain countries at the undergraduate level, across the entire university, and at the business school. But we're fairly diverse. I think we're intentional in that way, trying to diversify. I'm thinking about what the impact is on the campus and in the classroom, and trying to bring in different perspectives here at the University of Chicago. But I do think, is there a paradigm shift? I don't know. I think some of these countries, China, for example, there are so many students there. So if you want to increase international student population, whatever the intent is, that is a logical place to go. Some schools they have such a large population from China or India that they actually send staff and fly to Shanghai and Beijing and do their orientations there in country before they even come to campus. And so that's kind of the reality of what's happening right now. I'm not convinced that there's a paradigm shift at this point, but I do think that it is at an institutional level, and what others are looking to do and bring in what type of population.
I think more like some universities, especially in a rural area, that's kind of hard to reach out, kind of many different countries. For international students, they recruitment, they have a tendency to over-dependence on kind of certain countries. Like I can see that because it's easier for them to do it. Kind of big ivory tower institutions, they, I think, have much more variety, because one size fits all recruitment policy or strategy that can work for them. Basically, they don't really have to put so much rigorous effort to do it. But I think in kind of rural area, kind of small institutions, I think they have, but I think that is not good, because that can hamper international students' experience, and then in turn, if they can really have a successful experience in the host academia, anyway, the institutional reputation will reputation will be hampered as well. So I think I don't really see that any paradigm shift, but I can see the tendency, kind of what kind of universities is like highly depends on certain countries, kind of like main countries of origin for international students, like China, Korea, but I can see that kind of global aspect. If you see the kind of past pattern in the international students' mobility, like Japan was one of the biggest countries who send the international students to the United States, but not anymore. Their culture and the economic. So that might happen to one of the countries like Korea. Their economy is not good, and then their number actually going down. So some universities that really highly dependent on one of these countries, especially if the countries, the economy is not good, and then it's not going to be good for that institution. They might have to worry about it. So I think institution, identify and cultivate a diverse portfolio of source kind of countries. I think that is important, not just to attract the students from diverse countries, but also for their kind of students' experience and institutional kind of effectiveness and internationalization.
Jen's made some very good points. I've been at two different types of universities, one large public research, one private, another research university. The public had been doing internationalization, large numbers of international students, over 2,000 consistently. I then went to a university that was relatively new to all of this. And so they went for, getting as many international students in a short period of time as possible. So China was the target. But what I think most universities are finding who, began doing that type of recruiting, take advantage of the fact that there's a large population, there's funding from families to come to the US, is that if 75% of your students, as we had a few years ago, were from one country, it's much more difficult for them to adapt, because they're only speaking English in their English classes, especially if they've come as ESL first or in a pathway program. And then they aren't practicing the English as much as they need. And then you have the problem that we've seen with Japan. We were talking at one of the sessions today about Brazil. That was a place that was beginning to offer some diversity to a lot of universities. But given the political situation there, we've seen Saudi Arabia is cutting, and they're now saying you can only go to the top 100 universities and you have to be in one of the top 50 programs. So that's going to cut a lot of universities out. So there are a lot of things outside of US control that will impact who we get. And Jen's example of Japan is a perfect one. So the need for diversity, I believe, is something that every university is aware of, but whether they have the wherewithal to do it or not is another matter. And that gets into, Anita's point also about funding. It costs to recruit. So this is a very complex question that you've presented, and I don't think the answers are simple. I think the paradigm is that everyone would like as much diversity among their international students, but then how do you make that happen with all of these internal and external variables?
I'd like to say it.
If I could just make one comment, if it's okay.
Yes.
Okay. I mean, I think the question of the motivations behind universities' efforts to attract foreign students will differ significantly in terms of the context that you're looking at. So again, the European universities have different motivations, especially if they don't charge any tuition, than do the English-speaking leading countries, Australia, UK, United States, that do charge tuition. They have different motivations. So I think, and then those motivations, you know, differ in terms of, are they doing it because they want to bring the income in that foreign students bring, which is very significant? Do they want to diversify their student population, which I would argue is much less of an interest when it really comes down to it? Do they want to increase their economic strength by bringing in skilled labor and helping to keep them there? And I think that's certainly a motivation. In Germany, for example, I know it is. You know, what are the things that are really behind the decision to try to pull in more international students? Has a big impact on, I think, how universities then react to integrating those students and whether that succeeds and with what sort of you know, spirit is behind those efforts. So I think that's an important thing to think about.
Any more thoughts, comment?
Krishna, yeah, I do think that the third question is a very complicated one, and I feel like we're gonna go return to this question maybe another time. That must be probably more time. We could probably discuss more aspects to it. Is there anything in terms of the three questions that we've covered so far that anybody wanted to add? Otherwise, we might need to wind down and conclude for the day. What do you think?
Yeah, I'll just say one final point. That
okay.
One of my research areas is that it's not really at the institutional level, but you know, looking at the Fulbright program, right? It's the United States flagship exchange program going back to 1945, and millions of dollars from the U.S. as well as foreign governments are put towards the program. But and it's a wonderful academic experience. But at the root of it, at the heart of it, it's a public diplomacy tool for the United States, right? And so you have it's another motivation for the United States to bring in international students. I mean, just think of the experience that they're having here now with the election. And historically, those that would be here in January of 2017 will and can witness a peaceful transition of power. Speculation that may not happen, but that's another you know, a wonderful opportunity for these students when they're here is to see how we do things here in the United States that they may take back. But it all leads really towards mutual understanding in the end. And I think that's what institutions really need to kind of keep in mind with the international population, that there's a rich, they bring a rich perspective to the classroom that you don't get with just a predominantly U.S. population. So,
you know,
that.
David, you bring up something that I go quickly. It triggers very interesting issues that I'm also thinking about in terms of analyzing the data. That when you look at the research and people talking about supporting international students academically in the visa service in all kinds of places, something that never comes up, but I don't know if we take it for granted, is that there's a larger national policy, there's a larger social, cultural environment, political environment that affects these students. There's a larger discourse that is like subtext that is hidden, like the economics of it, the finance of it, our, you know, cutting off the public funding to our universities, right. The diplomatic tool that international education is supposed to be, the educational tool that it's supposed to be, but we never talk about it, right? And sometimes it's just, I just wonder, like, if you think about the ambivalence towards international students, that shapes a lot of what we do, what we think, and right, how we treat these students. Because do we owe them anything? Do we only owe like private enterprises to the extent that they pay to get? Is it only a pay to get this experience initiative, or do we, like, thinking about an international student 10 years, 15 years down the road, somebody like Krishna and I and maybe other colleagues, that right. They are, you know, our citizens or our experts or our professionals in the future. At what point does the nation, does the society, does the system begin to think of these students in those terms, right? And these things never come up unless you really think about international students as international students with a faculty group of a scholar group like this. And just, I'm so delighted to be even able to come here and express some of these half-baked ideas with you, because these things are not even talked about, right? I mean, we just talk about it in very superficial or siloed or very deep but hyper-specialized manner. But thank you so much. I just wanted to highlight the importance of bringing these many perspectives into the conversation. That way, platform, the name of the platform is International Students Unabashedly, instead of like internationalization. In that sense, I'm kind of suggesting that the second question was kind of diluting, and I hope that we both look broader and also don't hesitate to look very deeply into the issue of international students as international students. I just wanted to say that.
I'm going to agree with you. I think you make a very important point. And, you know, I know we can talk about the academic aspect, but, you know, at the end of the day, it's still, these are still, you know, human beings with lives who bring their families. And there's many aspects to the question. It's multifaceted, as you had mentioned quite a few times. You know, it's intersectional as well. And so, you know, and you posed the third question about, you know, the 3 countries sending international students. Some of the things that we don't talk about is, you know, the perception of nationalism, you know, the perception of
their money.
You know, that's one of them. But, you know, the thing is, there's still critical discourses that we don't tend to talk about. There's the issue of equity. There's the issue of, you know, xenophobia. Like, what is, you know, what is the social impact of having the influx of students coming to a small, you know, coming to a small city, or, you know, trickling into large cities. So I think context really is important for us to look at, and, you know, where, what, how. I mean, we should be asking these questions as well, and, you know, unpacking and having a more, you know, critical lens towards this topic, because there's many, you know, there's many areas that we still need to, you know, explore.
Ideas.
I mean, what are, for example, you know, taking you and Krishna as an example, like, once you finish your PhD, or once you finish your studies, I mean, should you go back? Is that, you know, how does that impact your life? And then, you know, it comes down to this idea of nationalism. I think it comes down to the idea of immigration. Who has the right to stay? Who has the right to belong? I mean, there's many questions you can ask around this and unpack as well. So.
And if we don't hesitate to talk about these issues, I think we'll inform the rest of the community, and the rest of the community who has to think about the resources, who has to think about the limitations of space and as such, who has to think about the intersections of international students with the other groups of students. They can make better decisions. But I think those of us who are focusing on international students to really, you know, sort of highlight the importance of really adjusting the lens to the point we can see these objects and these issues and this perspectives very, very clearly.
At the end of the day, I mean, we have a responsibility. Let's come back to the initial question. Why are we internationalizing? Why is this global perspective so important? At the end of the day, what are we trying to achieve, you know, as a nation, you know, as a global community? What are we trying to achieve, and how is this, and not even thinking about our generation, but how is this going to impact future generations? What are we trying to achieve? Is it the promotion of, you know, national security, you know, cultural diversity? What are we trying to achieve? And let's kind of get back to, you know, the real societal impact, not just on a national scale, but on a global level as well. We need to look to the future.
I guess.
Just one last comment. Thank you so much for putting this together. I thoroughly enjoyed everyone's comments. And I think, Anita, you know, the point that sort of sticks with me with what you've said is that this has to be a campus-wide conversation. Why are we internationalizing? Why do we want international students, international faculty, international scholars on our campuses? How do we all gain from it? How do, you know, our community, the country? And I think that's maybe the piece where we are often in our silos as international educators. How do we
Mhm.
broaden that? You know, David, you're at least, you know, coming from a business school, but we haven't necessarily had those university-wide discussions.
Yeah.
And if we're going to change and pull resources together, then that's maybe a starting point. But thank you again.
Thank you, Krishna. Thank you, everybody. Well, I'd like to stop the broadcast so that we can chat if we want to. But thank you for listening. The audience, I was hoping that we can get audience questions, but because of the technological challenges in the beginning, we couldn't make much time. Next time, but we will try to, try to incorporate audience responses and conversations as well. Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much.
Thank you.